He survived. And my worst nightmare didn't come true. I didn't ever fall pulling down the screen and bust my chin. Remember? I was like, I know this is going to happen. But it didn't happen, so it's all good. We're going to end on what I hope is a helpful note, and that is that we're going to go over some cases. Some of them we may just be trying to figure out what the heck's going on here with this person. Others we may go a little bit deeper and try and figure out, okay, not only what's going on with them, but what are we going to do with them when we figure that out. I think it's good preparation for the exam. That's primarily what you're going to be doing. It's synthesizing information, applying that information. And I think it's also good because it really shows whether or not you've learned the information. I said, for those of you who've had me for more than one class, I always say, don't memorize, you need to understand. And that's the truth. You need to be able to understand it so that you can apply it. Yes, there are some things that you just need to memorize it and create it in your mind so that it's always there. But there are other things where memorization isn't sufficient because you really need to be able to pull it, apply it, and live it on a regular basis. So with that said, we're going to do some cases. We have some pediatrics, some young adults, and some older adults. So we have 3 pediatric cases. And our first one is about a little guy that I've seen in the clinic, JP. He was 6 years old at the time that I first saw him, and he had a history of phonological problems. Mom said he was a late talker. He really didn't start with his first true words until he was almost 2, about 22 months of age. He's homeschooled now because he was really having problems in the public school setting with a number of things. He was distracted. Mom felt he was socially isolated, very overwhelmed. He was never happy. So she brought him home. She's noticing problems with reading, phonics, spelling, and comprehension. She said that he's really struggling with blending sounds and figuring out which letters correspond to which sounds. He has seasonal allergies that are worse in the spring. She said he's had several. She really didn't know how many ear infections when he was an infant and a toddler. She says he's very sensitive to loud sounds, and he gets anxious or confused, even in the normal daily hubbub of the home with his siblings and his parents. And that if it gets really, a typical day, he just starts bawling and breaks down because the distractions from the noise are so overwhelming he can't do his schoolwork. There's no family history of hearing problems, and he's never had a hearing test before. So, what are your questions, or what are your concerns, or what are you thinking about this kid?
Maybe like auditory processing.
What are the red flags for you?
The sense of loud sounds and just confused and also movers, and then the 3D phonics spelling is something the decoding.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, well, let's see what we found. So otoscopy showed that there was a lot of scarring on his eardrums. That's consistent with recurrent ear infections. His tympanograms were borderline A shallow versus C, meaning that there was reduced movement and the pressure was almost pathologically negative. So that suggests what? We have negative ear pressure and reduced eardrum volume. That's a sign that what's not working. Not me, but eustachian tube function. He has eustachian tube dysfunction issues. Okay, his acoustic reflexes were normal if we were stimulating and measuring in the same ear, but if we were stimulating one and measuring the other, they were elevated. So that tells us the cross pathways are not handling information the way that we would expect. Okay? His OAEs were completely normal. When we did his hearing test, he had a slight loss at 250 and 500 hertz, but everything else was normal, and there was no ear bone gap. His speech recognition, speech reception thresholds were in agreement with the pure tones, and his word discrimination in quiet was 92%. He still had some articulation errors, and so I kind of made a subjective judgment for that. It may have actually been a little bit better, it may have been a little bit worse. I was trying to give him benefit of the doubt. But regardless, when I gave him speech recognition tasks with a +5 signal to noise ratio, he dropped down to the 75 to 80% range. Keep in mind, typical hearing, typical functioning individuals, when presented speech materials at a 0 signal to noise ratio, meaning that sound and noise are at the same level, will typically experience less than a 10% drop in their score from quiet. So if he were completely typical, we would expect at worst for his scores to drop down to 82%. And he dropped significantly more than that. Okay? At a +5, where speech was still 5 dB louder. So the fact that even with not a great, but a decent signal to noise ratio, he had a pretty significant drop. So, with that said, now, what do you think's going on? Have you changed your mind? Or do you think Olivia's working hypothesis is bearing out? And if so, why?
I think the Olivia's right because the acoustic reflexes in the contralateral condition because the
Right,
pathway
so we've got a pathway issue. That's a criteria.
and as well as the word discrimination.
What do the OAEs tell us? The normal OAEs tell us what? The discrimination issue isn't because of a cochlear issue, which we can get, so it's not that. But why else would we have discrimination issues? It's got to be something beyond it, so it's in the pathways. So yes, very good, honing in on that. What else makes you think it's a decoding issue specifically? So far, what evidence do we have that it's decoding?
Well, like we did better in the quiet than we did in the noise.
Right, and that's a hallmark of the decoding issue, that auditory figure ground, that degraded speech issue. Very good, okay. Now, what else would you want to see done with this kid?
We can provide like an FM or some kind of
Okay, and
dismissing.
before we even get to that, what other testing? But yes, you're right, FM would probably be huge for this kid. What other testing? What did Mom describe as some of his issues that he's having that we could assess? I see a question mark in the middle of the page. Phonemic and phonological awareness skills, maybe? Yeah. I would want to see that. Obviously, I didn't give you every single auditory processing subtest that I did. Had I done that, I would have given it away completely. He did ultimately present with auditory processing difficulties. If he were in a regular school setting, I definitely would want to see FM because he was in a home situation, and actually the problem that he was having was with the noise level in the home. I recommended musician earplugs for him that filter out noise but still would allow for, like, when he was, a lot of his work was done on the computer, it still allowed him to have that. Mom was not real gung-ho with that, and so we ultimately went with getting him custom custom headphone couplers so that he could, if he was doing work, whether he was on the computer or not, he could put those in and it would drown out the background noise and he could really focus on what he was needing to. And if he wasn't using the computer, they served as nice earplugs for him to drown out the background noise, and that did seem to help. I recommended aerobics for him, and it took him forever. By that I mean over 6 months, but he did finally make it through. And Mom said that his phonemic and phonological awareness skills were improving. They opted not to come for therapy. I did recommend that because he was still having ongoing issues with his articulation, and I really felt like we could work on some additional strategies. But they lived about 45 minutes away or so in Indiana, and Mom just didn't want to make that trip on a regular basis. He was supposed to come in this spring for follow-up for repeat testing, but never came back. So I don't know what happened long term. I only know what happened in the first few months. Okay, good job. So our second case is AM. And AM was born at 30 weeks gestation, so he was 6 weeks early. Anyway, 4 pounds, 2 ounces. So not only was he a preterm, but he was low birth weight. Low birth weight is typically any baby born under 5 pounds is typically what they look for. But definitely low birth weight. He referred on his newborn screening, which was conducted at 48 hours, and again before discharge 10 days later. So he was in the hospital for about 12 days before he was able to go home, which is actually pretty good for a 34-weeker. That's not too bad. But anyway, there's no family history of hearing loss, no known risk factors other than the preterm and low birth weight. Because he referred twice on the screening, he's referred to us for assessment. So what do you think? What are you thinking might be going on here?
You talked about earlier how sometimes, like, when they're born, like, there's like sounds that could be in their ears. So that could be concerning at first, but the fact that it's 10 days later probably means that there's something more going on.
Okay. I mean, it's not impossible. But yeah, you're right, that's not the most likely cause. What else could it be?
Low birth weight sometimes causes hearing loss in children.
Maybe because they were so early, they didn't fully develop all the odds and ends that they were hearing.
Right, I mean, it is possible that neurologically it's not ready to come out of the oven. So yes, there is certainly that neurodevelopmentally. Anything else you can think of? He could have developed middle ear diffusion. There's no reason to think that it might not have can happen. So that would cause conductive loss.
Is that just what's commonly done, sorry?
Middle ear fluid diffusion is the fluid. What else? It's really the one that's the elephant in the room that we really don't want to think about, but is a distinct possibility. Yes, sir. There's something has happened there. Yes, sir. So, otoscopy was normal. Tympanometry was normal. Acoustic reflexes were absent, both ipsilateral and contralateral. OAEs are absent, 500 to 8,000 hertz, both ears. We did a sleep-deprived ABR, but it was difficult because he was still fussy. But responses seemed to fade, so that we could no longer see a discernible dose. There's a pattern of 5 waves that we look for, and the wave 5 is the most persistent, and it's the best predictor of hearing sensitivity. And his wave 5 disappeared around 65 dB for both ears. So, because he wasn't maybe in necessarily the best state, he was still fussy. Usually we try to do sleep-deprived measurements because then they'll sleep. That little clicking sound can be kind of lulling to them and they go to sleep. He didn't. So we went ahead, sent him over to the pediatrician. They gave him sedation. Mom brought him back. We got down to 55 dB for the right ear and 65 for the left ear. So, and it was not conductive. So, what's going on?
So it seems like both the sensory and neural loss, because the sensory is even the input, is that why you
Right, and at this point, it's probably sensory, but we can't say for sure that there's not some neural component to it. But we're not concerned neural like a space occupying lesion or anything. We're thinking more like auditory neuropathy or synchrony. The reason that we can't really say for sure is obviously there's a cochlear component because the OAEs are absent. But what we're using to measure is an electrophysiologic response, which theoretically is what the nerve is doing. Well, is it the nerve not providing a robust response because the cochlea is not working and stimulating it, or is it so we don't really know for sure? This is one of those cases where we would have to say, at least at this point, it's sensory neural. What severity? If you look at your notes, this is your opportunity to hear that. But if he's in the 55 to 65 dB range, and I should say, we did this to tone bursts, so we could do narrowband tone bursts, and we typically do, I will typically do in the 500 hertz range, the 1000 hertz range, and the 4000 hertz range, so that I kind of have an idea of what their hearing is like, so that I can kind of get a configuration of the slope. And he was pretty flat. But when severity did you give that? I would say probably moderate. What are we gonna do with this kid? What should we do? What's gonna be our plan of introduction with him?
Should we instantly give them, like, some type of grade, so he
Yeah,
can
we actually refer to him to children's for amplification because none of us likes, I shouldn't say likes, none of us feels comfortable that we are as competent with infant fittings as are those at children's where that's primarily one of their main focuses. And they have folks that's all they do. When you send a child to a specialty clinic like children's, typically they have people who are very specialized. So they've got people that only work with autism, or they've got people that only work with cochlear implants, or they have people that only do feeding and swallowing or whatever. And they do have audiologists that all they do is fitting and managing amplification in the little bitty guys. And so, but then what else should happen?
I just had a question, if that's typical that, if they're referred somewhere that they say your clinic, that you would refer them back to a place that was a specialty rather than, having them fit at your clinic?
If they're over the age of 4, often,
Yeah,
that's my thought.
But-
I just don't feel comfortable fitting under the age of 4. And so a lot of people do that. It's not unusual. The other reason why I felt that referring to children's was a good idea is because of what should happen next. Yeah, and they can become, what's one of the things that the Joint Commission on Infant Hearing said is very important, that we establish a medical home. And because children's can provide at their clinic, going to Liberty, which also makes me feel good because I have 2 colleagues that work there that I would trust with my own child. And so I feel really comfortable referring them to there. That can become their medical home. They have ENT services available, they have audiological services available. If this turns out to be a progressive hearing loss and this child then becomes a candidate for cochlear implants, it's going to do that there too. And they have a network of social workers and other specialists that can help get them plugged into early intervention programs. So this is a case where I felt, even though they came to me for the initial follow-up, I felt it was the most appropriate after I did the initial identification that I transferred the care of that patient to someone who really could better manage it rather than having them come to me for some things. They could get everything that they needed right there. So, does that make sense why you would do that? Alright, so let's talk about TK. She's 5 years old, going on 33. Significant history of middle ear problems. Dad said he lost count somewhere around the 12th one before she was 2. So pretty much she constantly had flu. She also gets strep throat a couple times per year. She's a mouth breather and she snores loudly. She sounds very hyponasal most of the time. She has lots of articulation issues, particularly with velars and stridents, which she tends to delete or stop. She's very loud, and she is scheduled to be seen by an ENT very soon. But her language was fine, let me tell you. She had an opinion about everything, and she was not least bit shy about sharing it with you or offering criticisms or observations about everything from the decor to the comfort of our seating to the lack of variety of children's magazines in the waiting room. She listened. Both of her parents are PhD faculty members in other totally unrelated departments as well. So, what do you think is going on with this kiddo? So what are you thinking? Probably. But why? Why?
Something small with Eustachian too, which makes
Could be, but that doesn't explain the mouth breathing, the snoring, the hyponasality, the recurrent strep throat. This kid needs a TNA. She needs her tonsils and her adenoids out. They're a breeding ground for infection. They're blocking her airway. If we can, and then because she's breathing through her mouth, she's not getting any kind of moisturization that our nasal passages should provide. So she's drying out. It's becoming a horrible, inflamed breeding ground. At least that's what I'm thinking going into. I'm like, 12 ear infections before she was 2. Why the heck are we just now getting here? Well, in talking to the family further, the rationale or the reason was because mom and dad were going to graduate school and they didn't have a lot of money and they were going to school in an area that wasn't real convenient to services, and so the pediatrician was the one who was trying to manage it. And you will also find that there were some pediatricians who were very hesitant to refer to specialists, especially when you've got a kid like this, because they're afraid that if they refer to a specialist, they're going to lose that kid because the only time that they ever see the kid is when they've got problems related to ear, nose, and throat issues. And so if I refer to the ENT, then I'm going to lose that patient because it's just going to go wrong. All right. So that's what her audiogram looked like. She had a conductive loss. It was in the mild range, and it was primarily low frequency. We still had a little bit of an earbone gap when we got up to around 2,000 hertz, but she was essentially normal at that point. Okay? She had SRTs at 25, and she had excellent speech discrimination scores at 100%. Okay? So, what do we do at this point? She had flat tympanograms. So I could not measure acoustic reflexes. And I had OAEs were present, but they were, the noise level was really high, so it was hard to say for sure if they were robust enough to be reliable. You often see that with fluid. They'll either not be there, or they'll be there, but you're like, but the noise level's high. So anyway, so what do you think should happen with this kiddo at this point? What are my recommendations? Well, I refer to it, and that is what happened. And at the same time, while they were in there, they went ahead and placed tubes because they were afraid that. And lo and behold, 2 months later, when she came in for a recheck, post-op, she did not sound nearly as nasal. There was still some there, but it wasn't nearly as bad. This is what happened. We're going to have to work on that formally. She was not nearly as loud. Every bit is opinionated, but she wasn't nearly as loud. She said it. And her hearing levels had returned to normal. There was no longer earbone
well, I guess
You
it's
judge severity by,
So is it the lowest part of the ear, just the lowest part of the
so I would say she has a mild reverse slope rising to normal above 2,000. So she has a mild conductive loss with a rising configuration to normal from 2,000 hertz.
SRT, right, other than
I'm sorry?
SRT,
For SRT, you would expect, if you take a pure tone average at 500, 1,000, and 2,000, you would expect the SRT to be somewhere in that range. So if we look, for SRT is 30, 20, and 15. What's 30, 20, and 15? 65, divide that by 3, it's like 22, right? And we got it at 25. So that's very close. So what you want is take a pure tone average, and unless there's this huge disparity, like where it's normal, and really bad, but if it's a relatively flat, which this is not terribly sloped, then you should expect an SRT to be probably within 5 to 10 dB of that direction. Normally better.
I know this is going way back, but would you judge the severity by, like the worst that she could do? Or like by that 30 dB? Because that's how you judge it to be now.
Yeah, I would say that she's got a mild conductive loss rising to normal from 2,000 hertz and above. But yeah, so you want to go by hair, what's the hair? Because that's going to determine severity. And then the bone tells you, is it fixed, is it sensory neural, or is it not? So what would it be if, let's say, that her bone conduction scores are down at around 20 dB. Then it would be back to sensory neural.
So why the conflict? How do we come up?
Okay. Okay, she is not able to make velar sounds, so she can't get her tongue back there. Well, what would be something that would be obstructing her tongue or keeping her tongue forward? The tonsils. Okay? They also account for the constant strep throat that she seems to get. The adenoids and the tonsils together could be preventing the velar from closing. So that could account for the nasality issues. Does it make sense when I explain?
Yeah, because you just said tonsils.
Well, think about the back of the mouth. This is a kid where when I said open your mouth, when I was playing around with the scope, I said, open your mouth, let's speak in your mouth. Well, I didn't even have to shine the otoscope in there, and I could see her tonsils come back, and they were pitted with, looked like cottage cheese, and then she had active pus pockets. I don't know that it's necessarily the nutrition wasn't catching it. I think it was more an issue with parents were kind of overwhelmed and didn't necessarily always follow through. But now that they were here and they both were gainfully employed and they had insurance and she got what she needed. But yeah, I sometimes find myself asking, did it take this long? You know, I mean, I'm sorry. I told you about the family where I think the kids have to go, how does the kid get to be 11 stupid years old before they figure out that he's got a hearing loss? Especially when all but one of his younger siblings has been identified with hearing loss. After the first one, wouldn't you say, maybe I ought to get juniors here in the chat?
like on the exam, this is like a great thing, like, if you were to take exam with this, there is no way that I would have come.
Yeah.
To that
Then you
conclusion.
would have what?
That I would have sent on, I would have.
Well, I wouldn't count off for that, but you would know, would you have known based on this, who this person is the CMEMT?
Yes.
Okay, then I would not necessarily, this is not a voice class, this is not, yeah, but I would expect you to know that, ooh, there's stuff going on here. It's different to CMEMT. Yes.
What was familiar with distinguishing the types of interviews? So if we saw something that said, oh, it's out for the organization.
I would suggest that you have an idea about what you focus. So I guess the short answer is yes. Let's look at a couple of young adults. By young adults, I mean they are under the age of 55. I'm a young adult. I don't even know their age much. Anyway, we have LS. LS is a 50-year-old female. She works in an office at a small business. She does have a family history of hearing loss, but she said it's mostly in people when they get a little bit older. She does say that she's always noticed a problem with her hearing since she was a little kid. She feels that her hearing is interfering with her ability to do her job. She actually quit a previous job that required her to spend a lot of time on the phone and noise because she just couldn't hear. And she wonders, what if anything can be done? Her insurance does not cover hearing aids, and she has limited income and limited financial resources. So, what do you think is going on? What should we do?
Well, we should probably have a
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so she should definitely have her hearing test.
So that one has, since it's parole and it was kind of ignored, it probably just worsened even as a result of that.
Okay. So are we thinking this is progressive, this is stable, probably so progressive. Are we thinking reflective or mixed, or are we thinking sensory neural, or are we thinking okay, to say that. What else do you want to know? I'm glad you asked for it because there it is. So that is her audiogram. She is showing hearing loss that's in pretty much the moderate range, maybe moderately severe. She has a fairly gentle, kind of upward sloping loss. It is sensory neural. She has good agreement between her SRTs and her pure tones, and she has remarkably good speech discrimination scores when we make things loud enough. She's like above 90%. So pretty much you know that. So what are we going to do for this lady? What does she need? Okay, so we're thinking assistive technology. She could benefit maybe from an amplified telephone. But what else? You guys said, I heard hearing aid. I don't know that I agree with hearing aid. I think I've heard hearing aids for her. But how do we pay for it? She doesn't have much money. And insurance doesn't cover it.
Can you do that bundle thing that we talked about, or is that
Do what?
the bundling, or is that insurance related?
Well, it would be.
Did you say that you like put people in the Was there another practice code, is it? What word she wrote? Possibly live for
Vocational rehabilitation. She should be referred for both rehab services. She has a documented hearing loss, she has limited income and no other resources, and it's actually impacting her employability. She had to leave one job, and she's still struggling in this one.
Rehabilitation.
And so we have documentation now that she has hearing loss. So not only would they pay for hearing aids potentially, they may pay for other assistive technology that she might need. They might pay for an amplified phone for her at work. They may pay to have a captioned telephone. They might pay for a streamer that allows her hands-free Bluetooth compatibility with her computer, with her cell phone if she has one, with her television. So yeah, this is a candidate for this is a classic example of someone who should be sent to go through that. Because she may not get everything, but we need to start there. If that doesn't pan out, then there are programs that, for example, we are providers for a program called Here Now, which will provide patients who meet the income requirements, and she may not, she may need too much room. But if they meet the income requirements, they will pay for 2 brand new top-of-the-line hearing aids at the cost of $250. Okay, $125 per year, which covers their costs for, not for the materials and the components, but for the manufacturer of the hearing aids. You have to agree to do it, waiving our fees for fitting and everything. So we're basically saying we're gonna donate our time, and the company's willing to donate, and that is a possibility as well.
So is that check written out to the manufacturer then, not like through you guys, like the $125 per year goes straight to the
It
manufacturer?
goes straight to the manufacturer. They have to send a money order or a cashier's check with their application. And we do a screening to check and make sure that they look, because they tell us what the income requirements are based on their household size. And so if I see they're not, they don't meet the income requirements, I'm not gonna have them waste that money. I'm gonna say, look, this was our only hope, but because I've had people who have very limited income, and on paper it looks like they make it, but then we find out, oh, well, they have $5,000 put away in a savings account that's their funeral fund. Well, that's all dandy and that's a great thing, but this foundation is gonna look at that and say they have $5,000 of disposable income. Right, so we're not gonna. Okay, alright, so that's LS. Now we have FS, who's 55. He has a history of noise exposure, both occupational and recreational. He has unbearable ringing in his ears. He denies having any hearing loss, but he does admit he sometimes has problems understanding on the phone. His wife's frequently complaining that he listens to the TV too loud, and he doesn't always seem to hear her when she's talking to him, but he thinks that's just convenient hearing her being married to the same person for 35 years. Okay. So the problem is not his hearing, it's everything else. So he actually came in for a tinnitus assessment and hearing test. When we did his tinnitus assessment, he was a grade 3, which is moderate, which means that his tinnitus could be debilitating enough to occasionally disrupt sleep and daily activities. His tinnitus handicap score doesn't really match well with his description that it's unbearable. So he's describing it as being, I would have thought that he would have scored like in the catastrophic range. Because he was talking about how it's driving him crazy. He's had, as he put it, bad thoughts. And yet, when he actually filled out an objective questionnaire, it wasn't putting out the ear rate. So there's some discrepancy there. And his tinnitus roughly corresponds to the range where he has the worst amount of hearing loss. So what do we do at this point?
You know, like hearing aids, like all the hearing aids, but also aren't there hearing aids that like will match the tinnitus?
There are hearing aids that are available that are just hearing aids. There are hearing aids that are available that also provide tinnitus masking, so they're a combination. Or you can just do tinnitus masking. This guy has both issues. What we can
Did you say a lot of the time if someone has a hearing loss and you fix that, it'll fix the tinnitus as well?
up to 80% of the time.
So you should try it.
So, yes, what I would probably do, first of all, I do a lot of counseling with him in terms of, you know, what's his lifestyle like? Does he have high caffeine intake? Is that going to be a trigger? Does he have high salt intake? Because that can be a trigger. Does he eat a lot of processed foods with nitrates and nitrites and MSG and things like that? Those can be triggers for people. What are his medications like? There are some medications that can trigger tinnitus. So we'll look at all those things. But then we would want to try, I typically will try, if they have both hearing loss and tinnitus, and objectively it's not coming out in the horribly catastrophic, severe, catastrophic range, I'm going to try regular hearing aids first because they're significantly less expensive. And let him try it and see if he gets religion. And if he doesn't, we can always exchange them for the ones with tinnitus masking. One of the manufacturers now is really cool. They send you a hearing aid that has a generic chip in it when it comes, and when we hook it up to the computer, we pick what level of technology we want and what special features, and they can try it. When they bring it, and we set how long. So after, say we set it for 2 weeks, after 2 weeks, the hearing aid just goes, beep, 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 doesn't work. Someone else comes in, they have totally different hearing loss, totally different hearing needs. We reprogram it for them and we reset it. So it actually has the option where he could come back in, I could add the tinnitus masker to it, see if that helps, and then he can make that decision. So, yes, you're absolutely right. So this guy, he needs counseling, tinnitus management, and he needs amplification, possibly tinnitus. Okay. That was his audience. Yes.
That just reminded me, what's the disorder that usually drops down at like 6?
Voice industry
Yeah,
rules?
like
The
the
notch.
notch, yes. Is that kind of something?
And he kind of does have a little bit of a notch, because you can kind of see it, especially in the left ear. It doesn't cover, but it kind of stops and
Right.
flattens out. All right, so now we're going to talk about a couple of older adults. So, this is my problem usually. The one that just will not go away. The one who tries to bribe me with promises of dinner and drinks if I will come to her home and make house calls. She just, it's a hassle for her to get in. I just, she drives me crazy. But it's been 3 months since she's called. And I think the last time when she really did kind of overstep the line, I think a little bit with the offer of dinner and drinks and show you a nice it's time for you. Didn't bother to even go or ask her where she was going with that. Because that's what kind of, I was like, okay, that's maybe my mind's in the gutter, but based on my experience with her, she's always touchy-feely. I was like, sister, we're not going there. I can't go, sorry, as a matter of fact, so what it has been 3 months. It was right around Valentine's Day, and I was like, you know what? I'm going out to dinner with my wife to celebrate Valentine's Day, so I'm not going to be looking over. And he said she's retired, he's an instructor and professional pianist. Actually, you've met this person, you know who this is, but yes. But anyway, she has a long-standing history of sloping mild to moderate sensorineural hearing loss that was slightly worse in the right ear versus the left ear. But she's been successfully using hearing aids for a number of years and would basically come in for like an annual checkup, and that's about it. Well, 2 years ago she was in a motor vehicle accident where she was the passenger, they got T-boned, and she sustained multiple fractures of the right side of her face, a right knee injury, and lots of contusions. Since that happened, she noticed almost immediately a change in hearing in her right ear. And she was describing for me the musical notes, and it corresponds to a mid-frequency hearing loss. So she came in telling me this is where the problem is. So, and she was having a dramatic loss of speech clarity. She thought it was in both ears. Over the course of several months to a year, she's gotten increasingly frustrated. Both myself and her daughter, since all of this has been happening, we were starting to notice some decline in memory, cognitive function, and she just says, I just want to hear like I used to hear, or at least better than I do now. Okay, so over here is what her hearing had been like prior to everything. Then this is what her hearing is like after the accident. So notice she was right. There was this huge chunk of now missing information in mid-frequencies. Okay? So, what should we do for someone like that? Hmm? Or at least try and adjust what she has, yes. So we want to definitely modify, adjust amplification.
She already on
Mhm. Yes. She already had hearing aids and had been successful with them, but ever since the accident, she felt like they weren't helping. But she would just call and complain that her hearing aids weren't working well. She would never take us up on an offer for an appointment or to check her hearing. Once she finally, that went on for a long time. And she would call and she would say things, we're like, okay, we just talked about this. And then finally her daughter called and goes, I don't know if you can do this, but I think my mom's having some cognitive issues. So we finally got her to come in. We found objectively the change in her hearing. We addressed that. She still complains that she can't hear. She can't understand. So what do we do at this point? Obviously, amplification is not enough. It's really hard. I mean, it's a perceptual thing. So I do believe, with that she is, she's truly having more problems. So what are we going to do for her?
Put her in some kind of counseling or like group or something so that she can.
Okay, right. Definitely we have to counsel. I mean, she's got very unrealistic expectations. I'm like, look, lady, hearing has changed. I'm sorry. Musicians, only if you ever have whether you're a speech pathologist or an audiologist, good professional musicians, professional singers, they are going to be run screaming from the room. They know music and sound as well as we do, but from a very different perspective. And so it's often we find ourselves not really communicating, we're talking about the same thing, but on very different pages. So, but in addition to the counts, I'm trying to get her to realize that her expectations are probably unrealistic. What's a component of oral rehab with adults that probably needs to be addressed with
You could do like your aerobics or whatever the take-home things are.
lace would be excellent.
Yeah.
Lace, because it's specifically designed for these kind of things. Lace is an excellent idea. She wasn't real keen on that because she just got a computer and she's not even sure she remembers how to turn it on. Those are her words, I swear, I'm not kidding. So I said, well, do you have a DVD player? Well, yeah, but I can never figure out how to work it. Every time I want to work it, she lives at the Moles. Every time I try and work it, I have to get one of the girls to come over and help me with it. And I said, well, do you think that they would help you? Because there is a DVD version. And so, bottom line, we did recommend Lace for her. I've gone online because I can track it like Big Brother. She's using And when the last time that she called, and I called her on that, because at that time she only used it once, and it had been several weeks, I said, but I see you've only used it once, and I told you this is something that you should do a couple times a week, at least. I think she kind of got the hint that until she makes the effort to do something more, and I'm not being hateful to old people, please, but I love elderly people. I have spent a great part of my career working with them, but this lady is so unpleasant. Yeah, it's not just that she's needy, I can deal with needy. She's like really sarcastic and condescending in her attitude, and I don't deal with it. But anyway, so I'm not really sure what's going on. She wanted, we got her new hearing aids. We tried several different styles. We got her hooked up with accessories. All she had to do was, I think her grandson, who was very tech savvy, come with her. He had taken pictures of her TV and the different ports and everything, so that I could actually show them, hey, this piece right here goes in that, and yet she was constantly calling me, well, this isn't working, and that's not working, you need to come out to my apartment, and I'm like, no, I don't anyway, so, I did suggest that to her daughter, and I said, are you comfortable? She goes, please don't, because she said then she's gonna think that I called you and put you up to that, because I've been trying to get her to go. I said, okay. So I just documented that we have had this conversation and said that the daughter, who is her power of attorney, she was under that, that said she did not want me to discuss that with her mom, so it's bad.
Okay.
But yes, I would, otherwise, because I do think she has some financial. And I think she's sundown where it gets worse as the day goes on. And that's why I certainly got one dreams. I get to see it really splashed in the headlines, and then I did something inappropriate. Alright. Let's try this. We have a 90-year-old female. She's a retired secretary. She feels like she's had hearing loss for about 5 years, although that's questionable. It's probably longer. She has a set of older analog hearing aids, so they're not new technology. She said that she hears better in noisy situations than in quiet, and that her hearing is better. Yes, I know, I see the face, I do the same thing when they tell me that. And she said that she stopped wearing her hearing aids because they keep going dead. And she's interested in what can be done to make her hear better. Okay? So, that's what her hearing looks like. So, what are we doing for her? What would an oral rehab program for this lady look like? Obviously, she needs hearing aids. Probably needs some assistive technology to go along with it. But what's the nitty-gritty? What are the things that I might say to you, my colleague in speech pathology in the clinic? Okay, we can't bill for me to provide oral rehab for her. I really need some oral rehab for her, so I'm referring her to you. What are you gonna do? Like what nature? Would you do it individually? Would you do it in a group?
Yeah, groups maybe.
Sorry, I saw that sharing face. I'm not making myself clear. It's not you, it's me. Yeah, I do think she'd be a great candidate for group oral rehab to work on some speech reading training. What else could she then get through that? Some speech assertiveness training. That might be very helpful for her. So yeah, she'd be an awesome candidate for group. And maybe some individual. Maybe to maybe some specific significant others that can do clear speech training might be very helpful. Help orient them to her technology as well. And she'd be pretty much the classic. This would be the generic, what's the optimum, what's the ideal. Very much we did that for her, I think we had the optimum. So that's what was recommended. And at the time they were having, she actually had the opportunity to get follow-up through the VA, because she had a TRICARE widow, and so they actually had some group oral rehab programs at
She's not posting this very delicately. Like, I feel like 90's like really old. Would there be other people as old as her? I just feel like it's
the age. 90's the new 75. Seriously, I mean, it really is.
would there be other people like her age that
Oh, sure, sure.
or
And if this were in Florida, she'd be a youngster. We had cochlear implant patients that were 96. I mean, seriously. At the University of Florida, the oldest cochlear implant patient that had a chance was 96.
It's really worth it.
So, that's young.
How do you decide if they're a good candidate for group? Just with their
Are they sociable? Are they
willing?
right? Are they participating in any kind of group activities? If they're not, then I'm gonna probably recommend more one-on-one. That's probably more appropriate to the types of communication situations they're gonna be in. But she's still driving. This is funny. You're gonna and this is a quote. I drive my older friends to all of their appointments because they don't drive. And she goes, and you know how some of those old ladies can be. A lot. I swear to you, she said that those old ladies mumble a lot. She's 90. Her old lady's okay. So whatever. It's all in your perspective. All right, let's do this last one. We have a 76-year-old female. She's a retired librarian, long-standing history of stable but mysteriously slipping mild profound hearing loss that was identified when she was 6. Until recently, she's been using hearing aids powered behind the ear hearing aids. She was even able to use her cell phone without any problem. And let me tell you, people with that type of hearing loss with standard PTs don't do well on cell phones, but she was. She had been having a 3-month history of increased difficulty understanding speech, both with and without her hearing aids. And the troubleshooting check, the check for hearing aids indicate that they're working to specifications. Okay, so we're thinking it's not the hearing aids, something's going on with her hearing. So, this is what her hearing had been like, and it had been like that for a long time. Then when we checked her, this is what her hearing had been like. She basically bottoms out in the left ear above 750 hertz. She's got no useful hearing anymore. And she's had a dramatic drop in her right ear. Her speech system went from the 60s down to the 20s and 30s. What are we recommending for this patient? I think I heard it. What did you say, Grace? Yes, we did.
How old is she?
She's
70?
And she actually opted to go through with it, and is actually doing quite well. Question?
If they decide not to get it, what
You tell me, what would you do then? That's a very good question. And that would be something that would not be at all unlikely to put on the exam. This is what we recommended, and she chose not to do it. So now what are you going to do with her? Okay. Primary problem is she's not understanding. So what can we do to address that?
Other forms of communication of speech.
Speech reading, excellent. Maybe teeth speech, yeah, that's good. What else?
Sign.
Tom?
Sign? Is that like too late?
What's my recommend for my lady, my girlfriend? Please, might work. That might be very helpful. We might look at additional assistive technology. Maybe we get her a caption telephone. You guys have all seen that commercial, right? Or about the grandma, yeah. The caption phones are great, and those are available for free or at very low cost to folks. So that's definitely something to look into. So yeah, but we're gonna have to drop to Plan B then and do a more traditional approach. And there's nothing wrong with that. But thankfully she did agree and was determined, as we figured she would be, because we kind of know what the criteria are going to be, that she was considered to be a good candidate. She did not go for the bilateral, which I'm not surprised. She did go for implantation in the left ear, and she still has some quasi-useful hearing in the right ear. She's doing quite well. Yes?
I just forgot my question.
Okay.
Does she still use a hearing aid? The other ear?
It's bizarre, and it's not what I would do, but I have a number of patients who are doing that, where they continue to use a hearing aid on their better ear, and they have to implant on the other ear, and they learn, to me, I'm like, talk about auditory integration difficulties, but she does, and she's one of several that I've had, and she's doing quite well. Yes?
The vocational rehab, does that match up with your insurance benefits? Is that how it, or?
Voc Rehab is, their main thing is there an impediment to your employability, educational, but it's all related to vocation, so. And then they look at what are the resources. So if you have insurance, but it's not gonna cover anything, then they're gonna potentially kick in also related to.
So they will still only not have the.
Right, yeah. But the beautiful thing is, especially for the elderly, Medicare pays for Medicare pays for our rehab for cochlear implants. So, okay, questions? So this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to give you on the exam, where you're going to have to describe and talk about from an audiogram. You're going to have to label and describe the type, configuration, severity of hearing loss. I might give you not only the audiogram but some background history, and you have to come up with a plan, an oral rehab plan for that person. If it's a kiddo, I might ask you to, okay, now describe to me what's the process to get this kid into early intervention, and once they're at that point, what would be the process of getting them into services in the school system? Okay? So that you can show me, you know, how to help a patient navigate through that system, for example. I might give you a scenario where a researcher's considering a specific clinical question, and they're considering a number of different research designs for their project, and I would want you to tell me the one that you think would be best at providing valid, repeatable, generalizable results based on the possibilities of how we would design it. So I'm not going to ask you to tell me what level of research evidence this provides, but at least know which one would probably give you a better result. Those are troubleshooting hearing aids. Some descriptions, and you tell me how you would go about what you would do, and maybe give me a hypothesis as to what you think might be the cause. All right.
Is it good?